Celtics Beat is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
What's up, everybody? Welcome in. This is another new edition of Celtics Beat. You may have noticed, hey, where you guys been? You haven't been on for a little while. We haven't had a show since last week. Well, that is because we are now back to one show per week versus the two. Now that, of course, Celtics are done, we're getting into the offseason. Maybe at some point in time it does pick up. We get back to 2 a week. But right now, one per week. And I hope that's enough. I hope that's enough because, we're going to run out of takes and stuff pretty soon anyway if we start doing 2 a week during the offseason. I am Adam Kaufman. Evan Valenti's here. Keith Smith back on the program for the first time in a little while. I didn't actually look back, Keith, to see when the last time was, but I know it has been too long, however it's been. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So one thing, and Ev, we obviously we have a betting sponsor, and thank you so much to FanDuel, but we joke about this. We've been joking about this for years, that there is no safer bet that exists in the world than the fact that some sort of Celtics related news will drop sometime between us recording and the show actually becoming public, or maybe even the show becomes public, but then there's something later on that night. Basically, inside 12 hours of a new show, something will happen. If Vegas had odds on it, it'd be like minus 1,000. It is reliable. And so the case most recently was last week, which was we did our show. We had our fun. It was a good one, I think. If you missed it, go back, check it out. It's all still relevant. But the one thing we didn't get to hit on, because it hadn't happened yet, was the hire of Sam Cassell, joining Joe Mazzulla's staff. And it is not just him now. We have had news since just, earlier today, I think, as we sit here. Charles Lee, formerly of the Bucks staff, longtime assistant, has joined as the lead assistant coach on Mazzulla's staff. And this is where I want to begin. There's a lot of stuff, guys, that we're going to get to, but the coaching staff in particular is where I want to begin because, Keith, something we had talked about with Dan Greenberg, with Jared Weiss, with others on this program, ever since the reports of this guy and that guy and this guy, they're all going to flock to go to Houston and Ime Udoka's staff. Is it a red flag that guys are leaving, after 1 year with Joe Mazzulla, whether out of loyalty to Ime or, just going to a rebuilding situation versus a contending situation? Why are guys abandoning ship? And in the greater scope, is this a problem? Well, now you have someone in Sam Cassell, who's obviously a three-time champ as a player and been an assistant for almost 15 years at various stops under very good head coaches, even Doc Rivers, and Charles Lee, who has a championship in his own right as a coach and has been around the game for a long time, more than a decade, and is a rising, very popular head coaching candidate around the league, a finalist for multiple positions just this offseason. So now all of a sudden you have two very experienced voices on Joe Mazzulla's staff, on Joe Mazzulla's bench, which again lends credence to something I say all the time, which is generally Brad Stevens tells you what he's going to do and he just goes and does it. He said in the end of the year press conference, this was the objective, more experience on the bench. He went and got Sam Cassell and Charles Lee, and obviously they're not done yet. I've rambled enough. Keith, how much do you like these moves here for Boston?
I think they're huge. I think these are two great additions for the Celtics. They needed to get more experience on the staff. They obviously did not get the former head coach, which is what a lot of people thought. And I have been told that they were hopeful that Steven Silas was going to join the staff, but then when Monty Williams got the job in Detroit, Silas had a chance to go there and be one of his top guys there. So moved on. So you can't blame him for that. But getting Sam Cassell, that was already big, and then landing Charles Lee, who he's kind of been on a little bit of the Ime Udoka, Will Hardy, Joe Mazzulla path, in that he has been interviewing for jobs for years now, hasn't landed one just yet, but it's getting close, right? And that's just kind of how it goes with these assistants, right? They go through periods of time where it is, they're up for a job, and then it finally pops through. And now, I think if you're the Celtics, you have two really well-respected guys. I think they're probably going to add another coach or two. So let's see what direction they go. Unlike randomly, oddly on Twitter, which, I mean, right, it's Twitter, so we don't go too crazy, but people keep saying, do you think they're going to hire Doc Rivers to join the staff? No, Doc's not going to be an assistant coach. Like that's not a thing he's going to do. If anything, he'll
Go back to broadcasting before.
That's it. He'll take a year off, do TV, and then he'll probably try to get back into coaching if he even wants to at this point. It's he may be getting close to saying, "No, I'm done with this whole thing." As far as that side of life goes, but it's just they needed to do this. And I love what you said about Brad Stevens. He kind of says, "Hey, here's what we need to do." And then he kind of goes out and just gets it done. And my guess is this was one of those things for Brad of, "Hey, let's get this wrapped up so then we can move on to the draft. Then we can move on to free agency. And this is all kind of behind us and we're ready to go." Obviously, you want to have a staff in place for summer league and all that sort of stuff. And the Celtics are in really good shape now.
So I love these moves. These were necessary moves, but the skeptic will say, and I'm sure there are plenty on Twitter, you've probably seen some of this in your mentions. The skeptic would say, okay, well, this is great. They got a lot of experience on Joe Mazzulla's staff. So as soon as Mazzulla loses 5 straight games, which one of these guys is going to be lined up to replace him as interim head coach? I don't believe that is why they are here, obviously. I believe they are here to be supportive voices of Joe and bring different strengths, longevity, experience. Cassell, as the former player, both these guys know what it takes to win a championship because, again, they've done it, albeit in different capacities. They're really rounding out Mazzulla's staff, and they're not done yet, as you acknowledge, but rounding out Mazzulla's staff with filling gaps that he was just not capable at this stage of his career as a 34, 35-year-old of filling out himself. But does he in any way have to worry about guys kind of breathing down his neck? Because these are 2 guys that were brought in that would like to be head coaches in this league.
I think there's some potential that could be a thing, right? I think there's got to be at least partial motivation, probably from Charles Lee more than maybe Sam Cassell, where Lee had been announced he's gonna be the lead assistant, and that's a thing that happens now in the NBA. There's like been super amounts of title inflation, both on front offices and coaching staffs, and part of it is because that's a way you can get somebody out of another situation if it's just assistant coach to assistant coach, which for all intents and purposes that's what it is, but you could get them away from another organization by saying, actually, they're coming in as our associate head coach, whatever that means, right? So it's just lead assistant or whatever. So for Charles Lee, yeah, I'm sure at least somewhere in the very back of his mind it is, hey, I'm next up, right? And if anything goes sideways, and if this no matter what they do this offseason, this super loaded team with talent, anything goes sideways on them, and they decide, all right, well, we can't change all the players, we got to switch out the coach, I'm next up, I slide over a chair and go. But my guess is this was designed around, no, we're going to come in here to support Joe Mazzulla, and then if we do well, everybody does well, right? Because then when I interview next year for jobs, it'll be, hey, I'm not just for Lee, I'm not just successful under Mike Budenholzer, right? I've got experience now in under another coach in another organization. Same thing for Sam Cassell, right? It's not just Doc Rivers, I can coach under other guys and show their stuff that way, and that's big too. So I think those are all really important things to factor in, as we go into this year. But yeah, I mean, you're right. People are going to immediately say, pull Lee, give him the job. You said 5 straight losses. I think it's gonna be like 2. They lose back-to-back games. People are gonna lose their mind before the fourth quarter's even over of that second game. That's just, but that's just the reactionary nature of social media these days.
I think most NBA fans, casual fans, don't even have a clue who Charles Lee is.
No.
But if we're talking about Sam Cassell, I don't want to do the whole Patrick Ewing thing, but why do you suppose he's been an assistant for whatever it's been, 13, 14 years? You never hear Sam Cassell's name in the head coaching circuit, the running for jobs. He's probably interviewed for jobs and I've just forgotten, but there's never, Sam Cassell's, kind of a rising, like it just sort of, whether he's been passed over a number of times or for some reason teams collectively just don't view him as that guy, despite all of his experience coaching and as a player and as a champion. I'm just kind of wondering, I'm sort of wondering why he was available in the first place.
Yeah, he was available because Doc got fired, right? And Nick Nurse is going to come in and have his own whole staff that he hires, and he's in process on that now as well. So, but I remember this was probably Doc was still with the Clippers, and I think Sam Cassell was with him with the Clippers. I apologize if I have this wrong, but I remember there was an interview and somebody said, do you want to be a head coach? And his answer was very, candid. This is Sam Cassell, and he said, I do, but eventually. He's like, I have a lot to learn from this side. And I think that's what it's been. It kind of took him a little while to get into the coaching side of things. I don't think he was somebody who immediately jumped in, as the day one, retirement as a player. I think it did take him a bit to get there. I think he did some kind of like that almost coach consulting thing where it's like they show up twice a week or every time there's a home stand, they're in the gym working with the guys or whatever. But then over the last couple of years he has gotten his name pushed for a couple of these head coach spots that have come up. I think the NBA is in a spot where now like it's become like the young up and coming head coach is like the new like hot thing in the NBA. I mean, we have publications that write whole articles about that every year going into the season of these are the names to watch, this year that are hottest on the, assistant coach, trends and all those things with that. I think Sam Cassell too has been a guy, I think he's wanted to stay in the NBA. I don't think he's had any interest in like, well, I could go the college route and probably lead my own program there. And that's fine, right? Some guys are NBA guys, some guys are, they're happy to go the college route. So, but overall, I think he's just moving kind of at his own pace with this, and I that doesn't give me any kind of concern or any kind of red flag or anything like that.
I guess for me, I view both of these hires as pretty big positives, especially the Sam Cassell one, because I think Boston, could learn some things from a really good guard. Maybe how to handle things at the end of games, and I think great for JD Davison specifically. I read, I think it was Kyle Newbeck that writes for the Philly Voice. He had a really nice profile of Sam Cassell and what his departure means for Philly. And he was very complimentary of his work with Tyrese Maxey, which I think is really important for Davison as we go on here. But the thing I think is interesting, and this is a question for both of you. You said it earlier, Keith, about how, Sam Cassell, isn't really part of Nick Nurse's team. He's not going to be part of Nick Nurse's staff. Nick Nurse is obviously picking that staff. This felt more like Brad is picking two guys for Joe Mazzulla, not Joe Mazzulla is going out and getting his own staff. Is that a problem? Does that even matter? I feel like Joe not having a say in the two guys that might take his job if he gets fired might cause a little weird tension, but at the same time, that might not matter because there might be a sense of professionalism. What was that?
You don't know that he didn't have a say. He just
we don't.
Well,
it's fair.
It's like how we talked about what was it last week with Greeny when we were making the sort of the comparison of who does Joe Mazzulla know around the league? Like what relationships has he established at with such little experience thus far to where he can call, like Ime could call up this guy, call up that guy, Brad after a while could call up this guy, call up that guy. Joe was never in that position. He was barely an assistant. He was obviously a head coach for a year to this point. He doesn't have this Rolodex of coaches around the league that he really respects and has personal relationships with. I don't think that he could say, hey, do you want to come work on my staff? So I think, obviously I'll defer to Keith, but I think to some degree, he kind of had to lean on Brad to let's go get some experienced voices for this staff and lean on the relationships that you and the Celtics have.
Yeah, and obviously I don't think Brad is hiring anybody without Joe Mazzulla being okay with it, right? Because he's not just going to put guys on his staff and say figure it out, right? Because I think Brad very much, my sense has been not in the way of a coach GM where it is like they're holding both roles, which is always a weird thing because they. The GM needs to be a little bit more forward thinking and future focused, where the coach is like, hey, I got to win tonight. So give me the guys who can win tonight. But I think Brad still runs that position like a coach in some respects of, hey, I want to make sure, we're building continuity with the roster. I want to make sure we're doing stuff, for the coaches that are going to put them in the right place to succeed and all those sorts of things. So my guess is though, yeah, there probably was a little bit of, hey, let me step in and help here because he has the bigger in the wider connections. Mazzulla's been with the Celtics. That's been it, for his run in the NBA thus far. So, I mean, he's got connections, obviously. Any coach does. But, like Ime came in with, he played for multiple teams. He had coached a few different places. He had done a lot of stuff with the national team and those sorts of things, both for Team USA and for Nigeria. So that's a whole thing for him where, yeah, he could call up, 10 other guys. And we all made the jokes of like, oh, he's just dipping into the Oregon connections, right? Because it's everybody who's from Oregon, the state, not necessarily the school, but he's pulling all those guys in. And that was like a whole thing. So I think, this is probably one where Brad, helped at least along in the process and said, hey, we have a chance to get a couple of you guys. And I'm sure at this point, Joe Mazzulla was like, look, I have like 3 dudes left from last year still on the team. Like, yeah, hey, let's get guys and let's get going. So, that's probably all part of it. And I'm sure with Sam Cassell, it probably was, a little bit of a, hey, I think was his last year with the Celtics as a player. If not, it was really close.
Right.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
he
was it
went out a champion with
Boston. With the 08 team. Yeah, I knew he was. I couldn't remember if he played another year after that, but yeah, I'm sure he had built relationships with some people who are still around from that, and that all kind of becomes a whole thing there. And then obviously Charles Lee's been around and coached, for a long time. So I'm sure guys, know him through Mike Budenholzer and all that other stuff, there. And, as well as, I mean, he was a player too, before he got into coaching. So that's a, another level of it. So I think all around, this is, Brad helped, but I'm sure Mazzulla was fully on board, with this. This is why I think, though, I guarantee he was going to be very cautious because a lot of people are like, well, go hire Frank Vogel, go hire Mike D'Antoni, go hire somebody else. Those are a lot easier where if, heck, that might be a, bad half on opening night of, hey, why is he the coach? Move that guy over. See, I think now, these are 2 assistant coaches, right? These are not the same as, hey, let's go, tab, a former successful head coach in there. And I think that there's probably a little bit of that there too of, hey, we don't want that to be every day it turns into this. And we all know, in the Boston media, it's going to start coming up of, oh, there's rumors of, inside sources say, former head coach X would love to, would love to lead the team or is trying to take over power or, whatever it may be, because that's just kind of how the game is played in those situations.
So, Kaufman, real quick, I don't want to bounce one more thing off you before we move on here. In that same vein, would you, again, because I feel like communication within a staff is very important, and Joe hasn't had a lot of time to make and create relationships like this in the league. Would you rely on Sam Cassell and Charles Lee a little bit more than say, like, hey, guys, who are some of the guys you've worked with over the years and that you've had a good relationship with that we can come in here, we can build some continuity here? Because that to me seems like maybe if we're going to let Brad have a little bit of say and maybe we let the other 2 guys that have been around a little bit longer have a little bit of say. But does that create a power dynamic?
Let these 2 guys start to build out their future staff?
Hey, I'm just saying, it wouldn't be the worst idea in the world, because you need a way to communicate whatever the game plan is correctly, easily throughout an entire season. I feel like bringing a whole bunch of different voices in might be somewhat problematic versus having guys that have at least been around each other at one point in their life. That might be somewhat valuable.
Well, so I think to answer that question, I would assume Keith feels the same way, but obviously, Keith, by all means, answer for yourself. But I think the bottom line is you are just looking for a room of guys who can trust one another and be comfortable with one another and be vocal with one another. And, you're not like Bill Belichick at this stage of his career, who seemingly just wants to be, surrounded by yes men who aren't going to challenge him. I think that Joe had to lean on Brad, as you guys talked about, to get some experienced voices in. And now that you have Sam and you have Charles, now it's okay, collectively, this group of, and Brad's still in the mix. So this group of 4 people, who else do we want in this room that we are all comfortable with? And I think it goes from there. I don't have a specific name in mind, and maybe Keith, you do, but it's not going to surprise me in the least that in a few days, an hour after this podcast comes out, or, in a week and a half, when we find out the next hire down Mazzulla's bench that joins up is someone who has worked with one of these guys in the past, or knows one of these, played with one of these guys in the past, or whatever it may be. I think there will be, I think comfort is going to be the name of the game to some degree, just in terms of personalities meshing, not, oh, they won't challenge one another or disagree or anything like that. But I'm inclined to think, Keith, that it's going to go that way.
That's exactly where I'm at with this. I think too, we need to recognize the last job only got filled yesterday. We're recording this on Sunday, so the Raptors job got filled Saturday. So we're now just starting to see, all right, well, now all the head coach spots are filled. Those coaches are going to evaluate, all right, who's still here from the former coach's staff? Who do we want to keep around? Who are we going to let go? How are we going to move in this direction? And then that's going to free up some other guys too. Like I've had a lot of people ask and a lot of people suggest, what about Dave Yeager? He was former head coach, really respected assistant on Doc Rivers' staff. Well, we haven't heard anything yet, because that could be one more Nick Nurse says, hey, I want a little continuity from last year's team. I'd like him to stick around. This is a guy I'd like to have here with me, or maybe that just we haven't gotten there yet, right? And that'll pop here in the next couple of days. And I think he'd be a really good addition to the Celtics. So well, we're going to start to see more of that, and as these guys land too, we're going to see, whether it be Adrian Griffin takes a former Raptors staffer to Milwaukee with him, or the new Darko, I think you say Rajakovic.
It's not Milicic.
No, it is definitely not Darko Milicic.
Different Darko.
It's I think he is. We'll see if he takes anybody from the Grizzlies. With him, and he's also been around for a while, doing some stuff too. So that's going to be as we see different things fill out that way, that'll leave some guys kind of without a spot. And Boston, as we know right now, still looks like they have maybe 2-3 spots to fill. So that I don't think they're done by any means.
So what I'm really wondering, Keith and Evan, this is where I thought you were going to go with that last question was, like camaraderie and collaboration, like that's all going to be important. And again, maybe these next hires are guys that Cassell or Lee have worked with in the past, or like I said, played with in the past, or whatever else. But what I'm wondering is going forward, and obviously, like, this is still Joe Mazzulla's team, Joe Mazzulla's staff. He's sort of the end all be all in terms of where they're at philosophically. But I'm wondering what sort of influence these new voices in the room and on the bench have on the way they play, Keith. Is it, for instance, are we still going to be talking next year about 3-point rate? Are they going to have a little bit more of a mid-range game? I know, like, people want to say the mid-range game in the NBA is dead. It's not dead. It's dead in Boston. Boston was toward the bottom of the league in terms of mid-range, chances or opportunities or attempts or whatever the word you want to use, but that's not necessarily true across the league. It's dwindling. It's less, but it's not as non-existent as it was with the Celtics last year. Are they going to become as good as, like, people quibble about sort of where Boston was at defensively? Pardon me. Choked up thinking about Boston.
The lack of mid-range game is really
I can't get emotional.
Are they really done? People think about the defense last year and sort of forget that they were still second in the league defensively by the end of the year. But you think back to all these patches where the defense just was not impressive. And so and it's like, well, they were defense first under Ime and they were offense first under Joe, and all of that. I'm wondering, be it Cassell, Lee, collaborative, new voices, whatever it is, Keith, how this all translates to style of play next year versus what we just saw, which again, generally was very effective, but obviously didn't get them all the way.
Sure. Yeah. I think the job of an assistant coach is to help implement the head coach's vision, whatever that may be, but to also not just be a yes man, right? If Joe Mazzulla says, what we're going to do, we're going to run everything next year through Derek White post-ups. He probably had 2 all season this past year, but that's going to be how we run the offense, right? I would hope Charles Lee and Sam Cassell would be like, dude, you're crazy. Like, what are you doing here? Or we're going to open every game with, Luke Cornett on the other team's point guard just to throw him off. Like, then that's hopefully their job there is going to be, hey, no, like that seems nuts. But if his vision is, hey, the best way I think for us to play is to take a lot of 3-pointers and to do these things, then I think what their job is, all right, well, how do we make sure those are better looks? How do we get more efficient in that area and those kind of things? Because ultimately it's the head coach's team, right? And that's part of it. We see this all the time in sports where it is, hey, my job is to work within the framework I'm given with that. But I think you're going to see them both influenced, fairly heavily. And I think Charles Lee been a part of a bunch of teams that have built really, really good defenses. And I know they have Giannis, but they haven't always had the guys that I think the average person would look at and be like, man, what a dominant defensive team. That happened after they got Drew Holiday, after they got Brook Lopez. But even years before that, he was on staffs with Mike Budenholzer where they built pretty good defenses there. And Sam Cassell, obviously, I think for the bulk of his career was known as one of the better defensive guards in the league. So, and he was a killer mid-range player for a long time. So I think you could definitely see some influence there to, hey, let's try to bend the game a little bit differently than we did last year. We don't have to be so, I like to say hardcore on the poles, right? It doesn't have to all be, layups or 3-pointers. We can, mix in a little bit of the stuff in the middle, we go from there. My personal hope is just anyone, pushes, hey, can we play a little bit faster throughout the course of the entire game? Instead of just, all right, well, we're up by 5 with, 7 minutes left. All right, let's walk it up and not take a shot before there's 2 seconds left in the clock. Like that could not be a repeat of, what we've seen. But I say that, and it's been, 3 head coaches in like 5 years of it. So I don't know that that's actually going to change.
Guys, it feels like it's been months since the Celtics have played a basketball game. And as it turns out, it's crazy to think about it. Boston could still be playing. This could still be a thing had the Celtics not lost in 7 games to Miami. And Ev, as we know, the Heat, they were on the brink of elimination themselves at this point, going up against the Nuggets. And fortunately, that gives us the opportunity to still bet on basketball. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So do tell us about the people kind enough to have us here.
Yeah, let's take a quick break to tell you today's show is brought to you and powered by FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs right now, because right now new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. There's not much left in terms of NBA to bet on right now, but there's always future stuff. There's always more sports coming up, and you can get $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. And I threw out earlier today on the Twitter sphere it's not like a same game parlay. It's just a cross sport parlay.
Okay.
I'm planting my flag, and both of these series are over territory here. So I put together a little cross sport parlay. Nuggets -9 with the Vegas Knights -1.5 plus 381. Just throwing it out there. The juice
not only to win and close their respective series, but covering.
Yeah, that's it. I'm just throwing it out there. It's an idea. It's just a way to get some more juice on 2 teams that look like they're just destined to win titles. So it's maybe one last gaps to make a little decent money on it. And I'm just throwing the idea out there. If you want to sprinkle, not your entire bankroll, okay, maybe throw a little shekel or 2 on that. Again, it's a great payout. Again, you're talking over plus 300 for that. So again, 2 teams that seem destined to win the title between those 2. They seem unbeatable at this point. You get great promotions every day at FanDuel. It's a safe, secure, easy app to use to talk about how all the time in my walks with my dog, I'll be placing SGPs, and you get paid instantly. There's no better way to place all your wagers on all the playoff action in the NBA than America's #1 sportsbook. That is FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/Boston to get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is FanDuel.com/Boston. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. 21 plus in select states. First online real money wager only. $10 deposit required. Refund issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Or visit FanDuel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Tennessee, and Virginia. 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777, or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700, or visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana, gamblinghelplinema.org, or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland, 1-877-8-HOPE-NY, or text HOPE-NY. That's 467-369 in New York, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming, or visit 1800gambler.net in West Virginia.
Okay, so part of the reason that Keith Smith is here from Spotrac, from the NBA front office show as well with Trevor Lane, you should make sure you check that out. I have, Keith's probably thinking like, man, he's been texting me a lot. I've been bugging Keith basically since the Celtics got eliminated to come back on the pod, because he has in addition to being a great guest, obviously, and we love having him on, he has a really keen understanding of all things salary cap in the NBA. And with this new CBA, and we've only sort of scratched the surface of this, Keith, in part because our knowledge is limited, and also in part because, as Brad Stevens acknowledged, NBA teams don't have the full scope of what this thing is going to look like yet. So there's only so much we can dive into it. But the overwhelming conversation around it as it relates to the Celtics is, okay, what does this mean for Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, supermaxing both and actually putting a competitive team around them? So I know there are many an article to come in the weeks and months to come, and you've already started, obviously, and digging into all of this. But just from a roster construction standpoint, what is your view of how Boston should proceed in the wake of a conference finals loss? And whether you want to call it a failure or disappointment or whatever word you want to use, very clearly did not reach the point that we expected the C's to reach this year.
Yeah, and I'll start there because I get asked that a lot, as I'm sure you guys do, as people covering the team, is was this season a failure? And I know the irrational fans and everybody says it's anytime you don't have a ring or you raise a banner, it's a failure of a season. I mean, a hand up, I'm the guy who was sitting in the arena in Arizona when the Patriots lost an undefeated season and was like, should have just won 0-16 and got the first pick. What a waste of a year, and that's complete ridiculousness, right? Like, but it's, so I'm not going to say it was a disappointment, 100%. That can't deny, right? Definitely a disappointing season, but getting a game from the finals, even if the path there was a little weird, like that's, to me, not a failure of a year. That said, in this new CBA, I'm going to give kind of a general, kind of CBA for the league as a whole, and then I'll talk Celtics specific. This CBA is designed to create parity. That's really what they're driving towards in the NBA. They don't want teams that are spending salary plus taxes combined of $500 million in a season. They don't want that anymore. They don't want Warriors, Clippers, and where the Nets were trending towards before they broke the team up over the course of the last year plus. They also don't want teams that are sitting way under the salary floor and then only reaching the floor towards the end of the year, or just say, no, it's fine, we'll pay out the penalty or whatever it is. They really want everybody spending basically between the salary cap and the first level of the tax. Like that's where they want all the teams to kind of sit in an ideal world. So what they've done is they've introduced a whole host of penalties on the expensive teams, trying to push them down. They've introduced a whole bunch of, let's call them incentives or things to push the other teams up, trying to get everybody to the middle, right? That's where you want everybody to be. So for the Celtics, they are trending towards this side of that ledger of being one of the most expensive teams in the league. They're already there. They are super expensive. They went deep. We can no longer say, and I was one of the people who said it all the time, of, I don't want to hear any more about ownership saying, hey, if we'll spend, when we have a contender, and then never doing it. They did it this year. They went all in, right? They, it is reasonably all in as you could expect. They're going to pay a massive tax bill. They're set up to do it again next year. Where that leaves the Celtics, though, is this current offseason, very few of these new rules will start on July 1st when this new CBA kicks in, at least as far as we know right now. To your point, the CBA itself, it's not out there. It's June 11th, and the final edition is not out for consumption just yet. We have a nearly 100-page term sheet that explains all the things that they're putting in, but there's definitely details in there that we don't know. So I'm going to caveat all that with some of these things could change slightly. But this coming off season, which we're in, right, but effectively starts on July 1st with the new CBA. The only real penalty for being what I call a super tax team, that's those teams that are above that second apron level there, the most expensive team in the league, is you can't use any exceptions. That's really what it is. You can't use you have no signing exceptions. All of the trade rules are still there. All the ability to do anything you want to do, all still the same. They're basically giving those teams a grace period year to say, hey, if you want, you have 1 year to get all your stuff in order, figure it out, get it all in line. Next year, summer 2024, so a year from now, we're sitting here talking, it's gonna get really restrictive on teams. And why that becomes a challenge for the Celtics is that is year one of a potential 5-year Supermax extension for Jaylen Brown. Jason Tatum's on a max deal. And then you have a whole bunch of guys still on the roster that make between 10 and let's call it $23 million on the roster. So you throw Jaylen Brown in that mix, you get super expensive. A year later, we could be into Jason Tatum is now also on a super max deal, which ultimately would pay the two of them roughly $100 million between the two of them in their so-called supermax deals, which is even then that'll still be 2/3 ish of the salary cap in that range, of that, maybe slightly less than that. It might be more like 2/5 of it or so, but it'll be really really close. Or I'm sorry, like in that range though. Just very tough to build around two guys making $100 million combined. So what happens here is for the Celtics, they have to operate as, well, we're a title contender, right? Nobody can argue that. So we want to be a title contender. How do we stay a title contender? While knowing if we don't offer Jaylen Brown the Supermax, we run the risk of pissing him off, pardon my French. And then he says, see you later then, I'm out. I don't want anything to do with all of this. While also looking at, all right, if we do that, can we then build out a functional roster knowing we can do whatever we need to do this year, but in a year from now, we're going to be able to fill out the roster in a competitive way around those guys. And that's on top of just dealing with normal things like Grant Williams free agency, and those sorts of things that are just, every summer, occurrences. So you run into a spot if you're the Celtics of, man, we got a lot of work to do and we got to almost live in two different worlds. We got to live in today and we got to be planning for next year, the year after that. And that's where it gets, very complicated and very tricky for Boston to figure this thing out.
Yeah, it seems to me the Celtics are going to have a problem that's not really super unique, where they have to pay two guys a ton of money. Yep. I mean, you look at some of the teams in the finals right now, right? Jimmy Butler and Bam are the two guys you probably pay on the Heat, and you probably believe in the Heat culture enough to surround those two guys with enough. I mean, they've done it the best of anybody. I mean, Caleb Martin not hitting a single shot this particular series has been really tough to watch, but he was nails both against the Knicks and against the Celtics. Gabe Vincent has been tremendous, and he's made a considerable amount of money this postseason. So it's going to be hard for them to retain that team. I mean, look at Denver. They're probably paying Murray and they're probably paying Jokic. I mean, at some point, the leaves are going to fall off that tree, so to speak. So as much as we kind of analyze Boston's predicament of paying two top 20 guys a lot of money, well, I think a lot of teams are going to be in the same boat. I don't know. And maybe Denver can get away with it because Jokic is just a special, supreme talent that maybe you don't need a second superstar or a second star. Maybe you can save on the margins by getting him players that just fit better with him. But I feel like, Keith, a lot of these teams are going to have this problem. Like down in your neck of the woods, the Magic are going to probably pick Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner to pay, and then figure out with the rest of the roster. I mean, it's just eventually we're going to all have this collective problem. I feel like we're all overreacting to a situation that affects Boston in a great way, but at the same time, Keith, it might affect a lot of other teams in the NBA too.
Yeah, it really is gonna. It's we're kind of used to. I would say over the last decade plus, the really the last two CBAs were really geared towards player retention, right? They introduced the idea of these Supermax extensions and designated players and all these things that you can do to make it easier to keep your guys. So what happened is we got into this world where we, if we go way back, right, part of the reason everything kind of went sideways before is teams were doing stupid things like signing guys to 8, 9, 10-year contracts, right? And that was a huge mess. Then they said, we can't do that anymore. We're going to limit everything to a 4-year deal. Well, then nobody liked it because it was like, man, my team changes every 2 seasons. Like, I don't know who's, on this team. So then they kind of felt like they hit it good. But then you had teams like the Warriors and the Clippers and, where the Nets were heading towards that were like, yeah, I don't care. I'll pay, $500 million for my roster this year because what I have it, I can. Why not? I want to win a championship. Let's keep going. And you had a bunch of the other teams that were like, that's getting a little too crazy for us, right? We can't get there. Now, from the players' side, because there's a lot of stuff that gets thrown out there and it's very unfair, especially as new things leak out about the CBA and that, where it's like, what was CJ McCollum doing as the, players, rep there? And what were all these other guys doing? Why are we in this spot? This is ridiculous, and they're really hammering on the players and they took such a bad deal. Well, they get a lot of other things, right? They can buy equity into the league and the teams as a whole now, which is massive that they've never had that before. They can do all sorts of investment and endorsement opportunities that didn't exist to them before. So they're going to be just fine. At the end of the day, the players get half the money anyway, right? So to take it back to your point, though, Evan, is there's going to be a whole bunch of teams that are in this boat, either right now or 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Even a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder that is drafted so well and is almost completely homegrown, they're going to run into, and we saw it, right? We just saw them do a trade where they traded a whole bunch of picks to kind of kick a pick down the line. And the reason they do that is because you look at it and you say, you know what? Like, we can't roster everybody. And even if we hit on all of them, we can't pay them all. It's impossible, right? We never could do that. But what this CBA
Those
has
poor bastards are going to run into a problem before they're even good.
And that may happen, right? That definitely is part of it. Because I mean, SGA is already getting paid, right? And you're gonna be sitting there. I mean, it's funny to think about, but we are a year from talking about Chet Holmgren, like, who hasn't even played a game yet because he missed his entire rookie year. Like, already heading into the last year before he's extension eligible, which is just like bonkers, right? Like it's just how fast things move. But what they did do was, right, because everybody says, oh, this rule was made to break up the Warriors, right? That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make sure the Warriors can't be good. Well, what the NBA said is, look, we're not going to say you can't, if you draft great, you want to re-sign everybody that you ever drafted, go nuts, right? You can do that. What you can't do is re-sign everybody and then go add a Dante DiVincenzo for the taxpayer mid-level exception on top of that. And, all right, well, we re-signed Jordan Poole, but he's not really working out. But you know what we're going to do? We're going to combine Poole's $30 million with this guy, and we're going to go get a $40 million player. They're not going to allow those things anymore, right? They're going to basically kind of crack down and say, hey, if you can draft better than anybody else can, and you hit on it and you pay them all and it's all going great, that's awesome. But then what we're going to do is say you can resign all them, but you're then draft picks, minimum contracts. That's it. That's where we're going, and that's where a whole bunch of these teams are headed. So you're absolutely right in saying it's not just the Celtics.
Well, first of all, how dare you dump on Travis Knight's 7-year deal? That's just, let's just get that out of the way.
Right.
Secondly, it's, people need to remember, and you outlined as much, but just as a refresher for people, that it's not about the amount of money they're making, it's about percentage of cap. That ultimately, like, Danny Ainge is sort of the one that started to really, trumpet that for everybody. And that's it's always good, I think, to remind fans that, if he's making whatever $60 million a year, like, hey, good for you, but that's a credit to where the league is at and the deal the players negotiated for themselves and the union and everything. But percentage of cap is what matters.
If
And
I
so it's
can,
not-
Adam, sorry, just for anybody who like still maybe that's like, yeah, I know, but I need to see it. We actually that's on Spotrac on every single one of our salary pages. We added the percentage of the cap for that exact reason because we wanted people to be able to understand that easier. The full salary is still there. You can see it, but if you go to any team salary page, you'll see it and like pull up the Celtics and it'll show you player, X percentage of the cap, is what that dollar amount translates
That's
to.
a huge addition. So thank you for pointing that out. I will be spending some time with Spotrac and reviewing a little bit of that because I do always find that interesting. But like when you say Tatum Brown, 2/3 of your cap, obviously once you get into the second apron, which is again where they're at and where they're seemingly going to be for a little bit, then it's really more like, if I'm not mistaken, 50% of your cap as opposed to, so you have a ish, right? You have a little bit more.
It will never really be 2/3 because as much as the salaries, the first year salary is for both of them will be, and we're assuming here obviously that Jaylen Brown's gonna get the Supermax. It's not as easy as saying, well, Brown gets 35% and Tatum gets 35%. So that's 70% of the cap. It's
Right.
not quite that easy because that's first year salary. The cap is projected to go up more than the
Right.
salaries will. So yeah, so we should still be in a spot where they're gonna make, it'll be down in the 50% range, or like I said, the 40% range eventually over time.
So I'm sort of gonna run with this until it's not a thing. And it's not like in the same way that Patriots fans of a certain generation for years, it was the whole "in Bill we trust." Well, I guess the equivalent here would be in Brad, I believe. And what I mean by that is I believe that Brad Stevens is gonna do what he says he's gonna do until he doesn't, because the whatever couple year period that he has been Hobo, president of basketball operations, generally he has done exactly what he's outlined, whether it's in terms of the way he wants to build out the roster, or we talked about Mazzulla's staff. Last offseason, Evan and I brought it up a number of times. He came out of the playoff loss to the Warriors and talked about adding shooting and offense off the bench and depth. Is like he was telegraphing Brogdon and moves like that. And so until that, I bring that up for this reason. Brad was asked about Jaylen Brown, and on the one hand, what's he gonna say? Is he not gonna say like, yeah, we want Jaylen Brown back?
Yep.
Sure. But I don't know, when he says like Jaylen's a part of the fabric of what we're doing, and we want guys that complement the Jays, and this is like, we believe that he is a part of our future and all. Again, yeah, he's been rumored to be on the trade block for years and under multiple regimes. I get it, but there's no doubt in my mind the Celtics are offering Jaylen Brown the Supermax. That's to start. Now, you can quibble with whether you believe that's because they want him or they want the asset, but they're absolutely offering the deal. There's no universe in which the Celtics are not offering Jaylen Brown the Supermax deal. For people, talking heads out there that want to say, he's not that guy, he's not worth that, you got to offer him less and just remind him of what his role is on this team. Good luck. He will walk. He already feels immensely disrespected by the team and fan base and city in a multitude of ways. He is not going to settle for a dime less than the Supermax from Boston. It's not going to happen. So the deal is going to be made, and I believe he's going to take it. At that point in time, Keith, what is the move? Do you believe the Celtics, and as Brad has intimated, that they are going to build around the Jays and continue to do that at least for the foreseeable future? I'm not saying for life, but for the next couple of years, this is your core, these two guys in particular, and you're going to surround these guys with what helps best get you over the hump? Or do you think that once he signs the deal, that's just another contract that you have the ability to trade?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. Just, I tend to try to remove all emotion from these things, and that's obviously not how it works. But when I look at it, in a way where as we get into these things, it becomes, so let's start with the fact I want to add this to, in this new CBA world, it's not only, I'm with you in Brad we trust, but I will also say there's nobody better to have than Mike Zarin on your staff that's going to understand this stuff and have plan A, B, C, all the way through Z, maybe even double A, like an Excel sheet ready to go if they need it for, years down the line and all those things. Like he's going to have this pretty well gamed out and he'll understand all the impacts of these things before probably anybody else will. So now to your question, and I'm with you. They're going to offer Jaylen Brown the Supermax deal. It's just what you do. It is how it works. He is an all NBA level player. He will still retain every bit of tradability he has on that deal, barring something catastrophic that we can't even price in. So you offer it. The only time things get really sideways right now in the immediate is if he says no. Because here's the thing, just so everybody understands, he cannot make any more money next year. He can only actually lose himself money. Either he is traded by the Celtics, which makes him no longer Supermax eligible, or he doesn't make All NBA again, and now he doesn't meet the qualifier for the designated veteran contract in that situation. So what ends up happening here is you get into a spot where you offer it to him, and if he says no, I 100% believe you need to immediately start the trade process right then. It needs to be, all right, you don't want to do it? Go. There's no, well, let's run it back and see how it goes, because that is a sign he does not want to be here anymore. He is ready to move on. So that's part one of that. I don't think that's how it goes, though. I think they offer it. I think he accepts it. Mm-hmm. I've come to accept in the NBA, the way this all works now is a player takes the most money he can get. A year or two in, if he's not happy, he asks for a trade. Personally, soapbox moment here very briefly, I have no problem with that. Teams can trade players almost whenever they want, minus very minor exceptions on no trade clauses and trade restrictions. I don't know why we think it's fine for teams to do that, but we get all up in arms when a player does it. Team enters into the exact same contract with the player as the player does with the team. So, so there we are with that part of it. So now they, I think they do that. Then what has to be your question is, to your point is, not can we? It needs to be how can we? Because it cannot be, can we build a functional team? Because if you're asking that, then you can't offer them the deal because you don't even know if you can. So it needs to be, how can we? And then that's when you get Zarin, Austin Ainge, and Brad Stevens. They get to work right on what do we need to do? I'm of the belief it will eventually cost the Celtics good players. I don't know that will be right now, this summer. They may run it back more than they don't, barring Grant Williams getting some kind of crazy deal that they don't want to match in restricted free agency. But this team may look fairly similar with some moves around the edges. And I know people hate that, right? Because it's just like, man, I want something new, right? But I think they can very easily look at this and say, I mean, if we had shot better in a couple games against Miami, it doesn't even get to 7. We win in 5 or 6 games, and we're in the finals, and we're competing for a championship. So you have that ability, right? So that's where now I tend to think, and I've said this, if they're going to lose anybody outside of Grant Williams, who's a free agent this offseason, I think it's Malcolm Brogdon. I think that's the natural guy to look at. And maybe that's crazy. He's coming off 6th man of the year, but I look at it as, one, stayed healthy, mostly, right? He got hurt in the finals, but turned in a mostly healthy season. That is the first time he's done that since his rookie year in the league. So color me skeptical, that's going to continue. Then I also look at it as, is he going to be as good? I mean, he was really, really good this past season. So that becomes another question mark. And I think I have no problem with what he said at the end of the year when he was asked about his role. And he said, yeah, of course I'd rather start. I don't have a problem with that because everybody rather would. But he made it pretty clear this is not ideal for him, right? So I think if there's an opportunity, clear up some long-term salary, clean up the books a little bit, rebalance the roster, move on. I think that's the guy, but I'm not even convinced that happens. I think there's a more likely chance, other than moves around the edges of the rotation and probably Peyton Pritchard being somewhere else just to kind of, if nothing else, do right by him. I think this team could look very similar next season to what it looks like right now. And I don't even know if that's even a bad thing.
Have anything to add before we call this a show?
No, I mean we could go on Malcolm Brogdon for a while, but we already got in trouble for that, so I'm gonna just leave it at that.
Yeah, we've done that. We've already upset the people.
I'm just saying. Keith made a lot of my points, but said it a little bit nicer than I did. So
look, I was screwing around on social media earlier today, and I scrolled upon I think it was our buddy B Rob on the Winning Plays podcast, part of the CLNS network, and I'm not sure who his guest was, but the whole question around the talking point was Malcolm Brogdon's contract a blunder? You know, it was like the Brogdon blunder was the way that it was promoted on social media. And I'm like, we've done this show. We talked about this this 2 weeks ago.
If I can, no. Like he won 6th man of the year and they got within a game of the finals. It's fine. You know, like it's not like I'm not. I mean, do people like Aaron Nesmith and Daniel Tice that much?
Right.
You
no,
know,
and I think what people sort of missed, Keith, in the point, and even those who maybe listened to it missed it in the point, was we never said Malcolm Brogdon is a bad player or had a bad season. The whole point was, if you dig deeper into the metrics, you could certainly question, you know, some of his analytics, but more to the point, because yes, he was the 6th man of the year and he had some very good playoff games before he got hurt and became unplayable. The point was the contract, in all likelihood, is going to age badly.
Yes.
And that's what people seem to have trouble stomaching right now.
That's where I'm at. That's why I just, you know, I envision a world where they run it back and Peyton Pritchard is now gone. And then Marcus Smart has his annual injury that costs him, you know, 2 weeks or longer. And then Brogdon is also on the shelf for, you know, half the season, which has been more of his trend than not.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden it's, all right, well, Derek White's playing 45 minutes a night because we don't have another ball handler that's healthy. And all of a sudden all that great depth you had is kind of out the window where, you know, it's, you know, where do you go with this? You know, we've been there before with this.
That's where you go.
Could be, right?
Beggaron.
Yeah, those guys are going to have to, like, not those two necessarily, but kind of to what Evan was saying about this whole new world we're going into, you're going to have to hit on your draft picks. The teams that are going to navigate this the best are the teams that either nail the draft every single year or the teams like Miami, and there's only a couple like Miami, that can pick off these undrafted and kind of wash out gems from other places, do the diamond mining process.
Like a Max Strus, for instance.
Yeah, Max Strus, yeah. Or, you know, if I go back to Brooklyn, right, when the first time they were rebuilding, Joe Harris and Spencer Dinwiddie, right? Nobody thought those guys were good.
Yeah.
And, you know, they got them in, they gave them minutes, and they moved it forward. So, you know, so we're in a spot where it's, you know, those are the teams that are going to do best here over the next, you know, 4, 5, 6 years, until, you know, I do think eventually we're going to see some unintended consequences that teams are going to be like, wait a minute, we went way too far with this is a little too restrictive. But the reality is the super tax, that's only a handful of teams every season. But what's going to happen is it's going to be teams that are going to be like, they're going to treat that like it's, you know, might as well have been a hard cap, because teams are not going to want to go anywhere near it. And that's going to be the part that's going to make things a little tricky with roster building. But, you know, I trust that the Celtics will figure it out probably better than most. They've done well, you know, in the past with the way they build a roster. And, you know, I trust them to make the right decisions until they show me that they're not going to.
Well, and to your point, this is a conversation for another show because we got to get out of here. But as far as just sort of rounding out your, like, hitting on your draft picks or rounding out your roster with rookie scale talent, you know, it's, and I'm not saying this guy's going to be a superstar, all-star, even a star, but just we're talking like solid role player off your bench. JD Davison looks like he can play. So
Donnie Wahlberg's favorite.
See, so hopefully that is a case of a
Donnie placed his flag on JD Davison Island very, 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 very early. I will give him
yes,
that.
he did. But
I love it, man. Yeah, I think just in general, you're going to see not just Maine, but all these G League teams just more and more and more. Portland, for example, has very famously said, nah, we're good. We don't want a G League team. We're good. We don't see the value in it. And now all of a sudden with the new CBA coming in, hey, we're going to have a G League team. Guess what? It's going to start next year. Like we're all in
Yeah.
on this because I think these teams are realizing like we're gonna have to use that. It's gonna have to be a real part of our roster building. Where all right, we don't have game minutes here in the NBA, but go get your game minutes there. Practice with the NBA team. You're gonna see a lot of people on that 95 route up and down the coast between Boston and in Maine, just repeatedly, because that's just that's going to be the way it works. I call that the James Young Memorial Highway, because that was the way it basically worked for him. But I think that's going to be a big part of this,
with Brendan Glasheen as the Uber driver. All right. Very good. Thanks, Keith, for hopping back on with us. Keith Smith from Spotrac, of course. Go onto the site and check out Percentage of Cap. I'm very excited to do that. Once we get off this show, you can check out the NBA Front Office show with Trevor Lane as well. Comes out weekly. They do the Friday show with input from listeners, guests. They've got a YouTube channel. They're very advanced. So make sure you do check out that pod as well. Keith, thanks so much for hopping on.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. For Evan Valenti, I'm Adam Kaufman. Again, we are coming at you once a week. Rate, review, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Not because you have to, but because you enjoy the show and because we really appreciate it. And hopefully those things are all true. We'll talk to you again after Denver wins a championship. See ya.
CLNS Media's Celtics coverage is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win.